So welcome to the podcast, Oliver. It's awesome to have you on today. Thanks so much for your time.
Hi, Rob. No, thank you. Thanks very much for getting me on. Pleasure.
So for those who haven't crossed paths with you previously, give us a bit of an understanding of your own journey in sport. What did your kind of youth in sport look like, and how did that develop into coaching and into being at Celtic?
Yeah, so like many people, I played a lot of sports as a youngster. Wasn't really particularly that good at any of them, really. Jack of all trades, I guess. I think nowadays we call that diversification and sampling and stuff. So, but that's I think just what people and kids did. And I grew up in a countryside small town, really, and all my mates played sport. My family played sport. We watched sport, and that's just sort of what you did. So football was sort of my main sport, but I played rugby. I swam twice a week for a number of years. I played tennis and cricket in the summer. Naturally quite competitive, I think, so I've always sort of just gravitated towards sport and stuff, really. But no, I used to watch a lot of sport as well, whether that's, again, football, rugby, snooker. I remember watching Wimbledon, and I was in the era of Tim Henman, and watching Euro 96 or World Cup 98 and stuff, and bits and pieces. Sydney Olympics, just about remember Atlanta 96, giving my age away here a little bit. But yeah, no, very much. That's just that was my background very much in terms of sport wise. I never really went anywhere apart from sort of local or county sort of level. But I guess it was just that love for sport and having a bit of a curious mind, I guess, to be honest, and I was okay at school. I did quite well. So naturally, those two things just seem to sort of come together, I guess. And I just sort of went on that path and went from there, and started sort of studying sports science.
And obviously you've kind of had a bit of a journey as well, through internships and coaching positions at various places. So what does that coaching journey look like?
So so I started coaching whilst I was at uni. I didn't really sort of know what sort of sports science could really give you back in sort of the late sort of 2000s, to be honest. Being from sort of my background, I always thought I'd probably end up being a PE teacher, really, just because that's what I thought was available. And it wasn't sort of till later on, or when I was at uni, we sort of just started to discover, applied sports scientists and things. I think things are a bit different now, where people are a lot more clued up on what careers can be, and there's a lot more applied degrees, aren't there? So there's strength and conditioning degrees, and even applied sports science and football degrees, like at Liverpool John Moores uni. So when I was at University of Birmingham, there was an internship with a guy called Dan Harris at West Brom, and I was sort of and ahhing, do I apply for it? I don't really know what it entails. I don't really understand. Anyway, my best mate ended up getting the role, which massively sort of opened my eyes, and I had a bit of regret, really, about not really going for it. But through different contacts and just speaking to people and applying to, and just getting in contact with fitness coaches and sports scientists in the Midlands area, I ended up going to Coventry City Football Club. So there's a guy called Andy O'Boyle at the time. And yeah, I started my internship there at the end of my sort of undergraduate degree, did my dissertation there. That spilled over to another year. I just started doing my master's degree into talent identification, which sort of started really my path really into development football and sort of development side of stuff. Really enjoyed that. That was part of a bigger project, actually, which there's a lot of data collection involved, and ended up getting published, which was great to be involved with as well. Me and Andy then moved to Liverpool Football Club. That was in 2011. So I spent 8 years there. Ended up having sort of multiple roles there. I went in originally as like a 12 to 16 sort of sports scientist. This was pre-EPPP at the time. And it kind of morphed. I was quite lucky, really. My role evolved into different areas. I ended up being sort of just a general sports scientist, so collecting data, analysing data, whether that's maturation, GPS, testing data, helping design programs. And that kind of just fell into rehab a little bit, to be honest, because at the time we didn't have anybody looking at that. We had a few issues around players getting back into training. And because I was the one sort of going through the data and understanding what was going on, what were the requirements of training, what were the requirements of matches for different age groups, I ended up becoming a rehabilitation fitness coach, which was great. It's probably the best role, one of the best roles I think I've ever had applied wise. It was a fantastic role, really, really rewarding. And then I ended up coming to Celtic. I've been here for 2 years, so I'm now the head of Academy Sports Science here. I run or help to run a department of a number of members of staff, ranging from nutritionists, psychologists, S&C/sports scientists, and we sort of take care of everybody from 8 to, they call it the reserves here, but it's effectively the under 23. So that's kind of how I went into coaching and got into coaching. A bit lucky, I guess, but it was typical kind of speak to as many people as you possibly can, and managed to get a bit of a lucky break right at the beginning, and it sort of went from there.
So what would you say is the underlying driver for you? Is it, as a sports scientist, is it, the involvement and the camaraderie? Is it helping people achieve their potential? What is it that kind of gets you out of bed in the morning?
I guess as a sports scientist, first and foremost, it's obviously you love a sport, isn't it? And I think, as I said before, it's this kind of clash of that and having a bit of a curious mind. And I've always enjoyed finding things out and understanding how things work. So physiology is kind of the next best thing, I guess, in that sort of step. But it's, first and foremost, it's the enjoyment of working in sport and being able to, I guess, improve in this idea of like mastery, I guess, Rob, to be honest. And I think that's probably why I've ended up working in the developmental side, or sort of academies, as opposed to more the first team end, is having this idea of I guess, helping people and developing, as I said, and just building on things, to be brutally honest with you. And there's nothing better professionally than working in development environments and sitting in the stands somewhere and watching somebody make their debut. That's a really rewarding process. But I guess sports science as well is it's still in its infancy, I would say, as an industry, and it's ever developing all the time. So that's a really rewarding process to be in. There's this idea of sort of continual development. There's always a need to sort of update your knowledge and things, and albeit, have a specialized area. So I guess it's just wanting to know things, to be brutally honest, Rob, and just have, as I said, have an enjoyment of the sport that I work in, and effectively helping to work towards something, a bigger picture, whether that's developing and having a small role to play in somebody's sort of developmental career. And I think that's why I really enjoyed working in rehab, because it was incredibly satisfying. There's some stories of where players have had real career-threatening injuries, at young ages. And I've been incredibly lucky at Liverpool to work with a number of players that have then gone on and then had really successful careers. But I'm also, or even more, proud of some of the moments that I've had with players that have gone on just to have a career based off, maybe some of the injuries that they've had. So I guess it's a mixture of things, but it's very much based around, helping and developing and just improving, I guess.
So looking back at, I guess when you were first, maybe that fresh-faced intern at West Brom or at Coventry, what would you say has changed in your philosophy over the years in terms of physical preparation or working with athletes or sports science?
I guess it's probably understanding what philosophy really means, to be brutally honest. And I think at a younger age, I would very much confuse philosophy with strategy and not really sort of know the difference between the two. And it is a bit of an interesting one, the whole philosophy concept. I've interviewed people and asked people, what is your philosophy? And sometimes people don't quite get in. I've had people just turn around and say Olympic lifting, or, I'm a functional sports scientist, or, well, as a sports scientist, we're here to use scientific principles to enhance performance. So that inherently is functional, I hope it is. So it's an interesting one. I definitely would have fallen into that trap. I wouldn't have really understood what that comment was really. So I guess to describe my philosophy would be then to sort of go through the whole strategy thing. So strategy for me, and for that book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, I think it's Richard Rummel, I think it is, but he talks about strategy having 3 parts. So it's a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and then a coherent action. So let's just say, for example, you've done a diagnosis or a needs analysis of a player, and you've worked out that player needs to work on power. Let's just say, for argument's sake. So you could pick up any sort of real, power exercise and just say, right, we'll work on that. But if you actually go for a coherent action, it might be a bit more detailed. It might be, what vector does it need to work in? Is it bilateral? Is it unilateral? What part of the power curve? Whatever it needs to be. But it's this guiding policy, I think, that's really important for me. And that effectively is my philosophy. So that, for me, working in developmental football is, am I always working in the best interest of the player? Within the context of obviously trying to become an athlete for our first team and have a career for that person, but it's always to work in the best interest of the player. And I really think that stands against any questioning, to be pretty honest. So if I'm having difficult discussions with anybody, or if I know that I need to sort of maybe bring up a conversation that's not going to go down particularly well with, with someone else in the multidisciplinary team, or if you're always sort of working in that idea of this is in the best interest of the player, whatever the counter argument is, it's therefore not in the best interest of the player. So for me, that's kind of what guides. It answers 1,000 questions, and it becomes very, very easy then. So it's, even if it is as basic as developing a power program, or how are we going to do that based on that player? Do we have to pull them out of other training examples? Do we have to then lose strength sessions? Do we have to do other things? Whatever it needs to be, what needs to sacrifice in order to do that? Well, so be it. But that's kind of how I think strategy and philosophy kind of coming together, where I think a lot of the time people get confused, where they just sort of spout off how they maybe go about improving strength or power or speed or whatever it is. And that's not really a philosophy per se. I think it probably goes a bit deeper than that. So that's probably how mine's evolved over time. But I think it comes down to really understanding that sort of connection, really, I'd say.
Nice. That's a good answer. First time I've had that answer, so it's giving us something different. So tell us a bit more about your role at Celtic. Obviously, things are very different these days, but in a normal kind of day, pre-COVID or hopefully post-COVID, what does your role at Celtic look like in a day-to-day situation?
Yeah, so I'm not directly involved with any one team here. So, and I think that's a real benefit, to be honest, is to being a manager of a department. I don't have any, time restrictions that way, or I wouldn't say drain on resources. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean that, you've only got a finite set of, time and effort to do things. So if that's being, pushed towards a certain team, and you then can't look after the actual staff team that you're looking at, becomes a bit of a problem. So I actually end up coaching, though, more than probably anybody else in our department, because I get to dip in and out of sessions all across the whole academy, which is great. But by and large, sort of my day would be probably trying to start with some professional doctorate before work to try and get that in, to be brutally honest. But whilst at work, I'd probably be working within the professional development phase to start with, so most likely the under 18s. We do a lot of our athletic development as a pre-training session. So we kind of nicked the EXOS, or what was before that, the athlete's performance model, where we sort of use pre-training sessions. And I guess the idea behind that is it's twofold, isn't it? It's not only preparing players for the session, but you're laying those bricks every day in order to build the house that you want to build, later down the line. So, we break that down into mobility, activation, movement mechanics, injury prevention, and some sort of plyometrics. So it's that idea, I guess, of that, as I said, that longitudinal approach. But that would be half an hour, 40 minutes. Those guys would then go off the train. I would then have sort of 2 to 3 hours of then doing, I guess, more managerial tasks. But we're still quite a new development here, Rob, at Celtic. So still quite a new team. So as I said, I've been here 2 years, but we've only really been fully staffed for about a year. And then obviously then we've had sort of COVID hit. So we're still trying to put things in place. When I first started here, I made the 3rd member of staff, and we're now up to 8. So we've gone through like a big recruitment policy, which obviously takes a lot of time. But whatever was in place, we've either modified or changed, or then put, a lot more things in place. For example, like pre-training sessions, that's where we do our athletic development. But it's coming up with then models of, progressions, regressions of mobility, or, what you can do for your isometric strength, or what's your plyometric model or whatever. So this sort of 2 to 3 hour window gap is really valuable for me. And we were sort of chatting before the podcast, but I guess that's the one thing that sort of COVID's allowed me to maybe concentrate a bit more on is putting things in place and doing those bits and pieces. But that would be the sort of the middle part of my day. There'll be a session afterwards in the afternoon with the professional development phase, most likely the under 18s. That will be, I don't know, lower body strength, lower body power, upper body strength, whatever it needs to be. I would be in there for probably another hour. I would then jump out of that. We've then got another site as well. So then I'd then travel to that site to then work with younger ages between 13 to 16. Again, that's another pre-training session sort of block, another 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it needs to be, where I then catch up with other members of staff and go through that. And then a couple of times a week, we then go and work with our sort of youngest age groups, who are sort of 8 to 12s, what we call here our junior academy, which is more widely known as the foundation phase. And we do 2 sessions there a week of half an hour. So as you can see, I can sort of dip in and out of sessions, which is great. But because I've kind of been at the forefront of putting a lot of things in place, I know, I can walk into a gym or I walk into a session, so, what we up to today, what we're doing, know what's going on, and just be able to jump in and coach. So I've probably been coaching here more than I've been coaching for a long time, really, to be honest, which is great. But then, you get all the other bits and pieces as well, which is management, which I also really enjoy. So that's a quick snapshot, really, Rob, into like the daily role or the daily life of the role, really.
So tell us a bit more about the approach, or maybe strategy is the better term, that you've used, because obviously there's quite a unique, I guess, challenge for Scottish football clubs, which is there's the challenge of meeting the domestic league, but then the opportunity to also play at a much higher level of the Champions League. And the danger is if you only prepare a player to play domestically, then they're undercooked for the Champions League side of things. So what's been the thought process and the strategy within Celtic around designing or helping to develop that player for that higher level of competition?
Yeah, so I guess the idea, is in Scotland, it's, domestically, it's probably close between obviously a couple of teams. We always know that. The aspirations are obviously to get into Europe, both just in terms of success aspirations, but obviously financial aspirations as well. So if you're going to get relegated from the English Premier League, you're going to get over 100 million. If you win the Scottish Premiership, as it's called, you're going to earn less than £3 million. So it's the difference in finance is huge. Getting into the Champions League could be worth up to 30 to 50 million pounds a year. So it's a big sort of aspiration to get into for us, and we see that as the pinnacle. Champions League football is the pinnacle of club football, effectively. It's arguably the pinnacle of football, sort of full stop, to be honest. So that's kind of how we direct things effectively, and that's how we communicate that with staff and players. And that's effectively the aim of the academy, is to produce Champions League players. In terms of our strategies that we put in place, mostly centered around effectively creating we were sort of talking before about strategy of diagnosis. So that's effectively a needs analysis of the player and needs analysis of maybe the environment they need to go into. So if we talk about the player first, the needs analysis of the player, that's just an athlete profile system. So we will test strength, power, speed, change of direction. We'll have match output data, we'll have maturation data, we'll have movement data, whatever it needs to be. Within that, we relate that back to chronological averages, biological averages, allometrically scale it, stuff I'm sure lots of people are doing. We color code it as well based on standard deviations. What this effectively boils down to is a meeting with the player, which has been probably one of the most valuable things I think I've done since I've ever started being an applied sports scientist. And this idea of basically communicating where they are and effectively where they need to be. And from that process, I think we can very much change the atmosphere, change the environment, and we can sort of just switch players into understanding the mountain that they're about to climb. And that's just to get to the start line effectively. The start line being either the first day of training of the first team or their first team debut. It's a hell of a mountain to climb, and talent might have got them so far to maybe 16 or so, but it's then what do we do after that? Well, it's going to become your job effectively. So professionalism and character is going to take you to the start line or take you through to maybe you're 35 or so and have a career. So we very much sit down with the players and say, listen, the colours are for you, the numbers are for us. What colours do you see in your profile? And they'll very quickly tell you, the highlights or the lowlights of the profile. We can then sort of discuss why is that, what, how do we improve that? What do we need to do? What are the specific strategies? How are we going to improve jump height? How are we going to improve, your first 20-meter sprint times, etc. We then build a program together. And building the program together really gives them this feeling of autonomy. So I'm a big advocate of Daniel Pink's book, Drive, because he sort of puts in three things there, doesn't he, about autonomy being, the main one really, and purpose again being another main one. But this idea of purpose, we should be communicating all the time. We're here to basically allow you to have a career and help you on your journey. But this idea of autonomy is effectively that that feeling of your hands are on the steering wheel, and then you've got a real, input into your program, and it massively increases ownership of the players. Ownership of the program from the players, and the players are very quite tuned into what they like, what they don't like, and they'll very much tell you that they can, we can squeeze in another session if we need to, or we can do this however we like, and we can build a real successful program together. But as I said, it's coming away from the sort of school program that they'd be used to, where it's very much you need to do this, you need to do that. We're trying to flip that on its head and become, it needs to be driven by the players. There's so many stories, you hear them all the time, of people like Clive Woodward and Dave Brailsford and the environments that they had and how they created the environments that they created. And I'm sure my staff, I get really bored of this, but I always sort of quote the book, Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? It's a fantastic book. And everything that they did was to win a gold medal at the Sydney Games as the eights in terms of the rowing team. And that's very much the sort of mentality that we want to instill into the players. And we're doing this for the reason. And I need you to sort of have that switch in your head as, your motivation might vary day to day, and that's completely fine. I know you're a committed player. That's why you're in the program. We just need to make sure that your motivation's aligned with your long-term commitment, and you can just switch in and go, this will help me get to where I need to get to. Let's get it done and find a way. But yeah, so that's kind of the main idea about the player and understanding the player and getting them on that journey and getting them to think a bit differently and buy into everything that we do, whether that's nutrition, whether that's psychology, whether that's the S&C program, whether that's fitness work, whatever it needs to be. I think effectively, it doesn't really matter if you're working with a 15-year-old or a 35-year-old. If you can show a player that you've got their best interests at heart, you'll have them in the palm of your hand effectively. And I think that's really, really important. And that's something that we try and do. We should try and show that we care. We try and show that we're here together, share that sort of vulnerability loop that sort of, Daniel Core talks about in his culture code. The idea that we probably don't have all the answers, that we might fail, and if we fail together. If we win together, and whatever it needs to be. But this idea effectively, as I said, on test, design, evaluate, repeat, and just sort of keep going through that process. And players really, really value that. And the quality of sessions always drastically go up whenever you sort of have a meeting, and the more meetings you tend to have, you just constantly on this sort of upward spiral. So that's sort of the player. In terms of the environment we want to put them in, we do a lot of analysis on what do match outputs look like for the domestic league? What do the match outputs look like in the cup domestic competition? Because traditionally players will make their debut in a cup domestic competition that might be against a slightly lower level team, for example. What's the difference then between those two competitions and the Champions League? What's the difference between the average player and your position? Where do we need to get to? So we're having this context all the time. And again, this goes into the meeting, and we can sort of discuss what they do normally in games, whether that's, total distance, high speed, whatever it needs to be. Where do they need to get to? I guess it's just communication, Rob, isn't it, really? And it's I don't want to say education, it's a bit patronizing, to be honest, because, players know a lot more than we sort of give them credit for, but it's just making them aware, I guess. And it's that self-awareness, and we talk about that a lot of psychology, in our sort of psychology domain, but we can just make them aware of where they are, where they need to be, how difficult that might well be. And we're only here to help them. So, let's all help each other here and create the environment that we need to create. And luckily, the club that I was at previously, Liverpool, have had a lot of success. So coming in here and sort of being at Liverpool for 8 years, I know what their programs look like. I know how things are structured at what you would maybe call an elite academy. And coming in here, it was very much a blank slate, but we're building all the time towards that. But to players, I can sort of say, listen, this program you're going to get here is going to be as good as any academy program you're going to get from any academy in the UK. So if we're saying that's near enough, as probably as good as it can we say that's a Champions League level program? Yeah, I think we can. Can we try and produce a Champions League level environment? Yeah, I think we can do that together. All you need to do as a player is turn up with a Champions League level mindset, and hopefully we can build together over a period of time and try and get you to where you need to be. But that, in a very brief nutshell, Rob, is kind of how we look to try and build that idea and build towards build towards creating this environment. But a lot of the time people ask, well, what is a Champions League player then? What are you trying to create? Well, for us, a Champions League player is bound by 4 things. So it's, and this is, I think this is across all Champions League players or Champions League winners, if you want to terminize that. And it doesn't matter what position or what player you are, whether you're Van Dijk, Luka Modric, Messi, Ronaldo, Mbappe. I think they're all sort of bound by these 4 things. So the first one is they're all multi-directional players within their position, whatever that may look like. They can move in multiple directions. They have this fluidity of movement. They've got poise, and everything that we look at in terms of literature or physical literacy, they exhibit that, don't they, at the highest level. They also, as a second parameter, they can all produce repeated high-intensity efforts. So whether that looks different from a fullback as it does to a number 6 or a number 10 or a centre-back to a striker, whatever it is, whether it's 10 yards, whether it's 50 yards, they can produce that repeated high intensity effort. They can perform, not just play, but perform multiple times per week. So with Celtic and Rangers, they have to qualify to get into the Champions League. You add that with the domestic competitions, plus the 38 league games and pre-season friendlies, you're looking at 68, 69 fixtures a year. And that's just club. So on top of that, the best players, or the majority of players in those sort of teams, will obviously be playing for their national teams as well. So it's this idea of they're going to have to be very, very robust, very, very quickly. We did an analysis last year of our first team here, and there's 28 fixtures within a 3-day period and 16 fixtures within a 4-day period. So, you're flashing players by saying you have to play every 3.5 days. It's probably just slightly less of that on average, which is an incredible statistic. And again, that's something that we use of our players to say, could you currently play the best part of 70 reserve games or 70 under 18 games? And obviously their answer is no, because they might only be scheduled to, or used to be playing maybe 30 or 40. So that's something that we need to sort of get into their minds. And what comes with that, whether it's preparation, it's recovery, it's nutrition, it's building their body in order to be able to withstand those demands and loads of constantly covering 11 kilometers and max speeds of just under 9 meters per second and meters per minute of 120, 130 meters per minute, depending on position or whatever it needs to be. And I guess the last one as well is a bit of a fluffy term, and I know psychologists will probably laugh at this, but for us it's elite habits and elite mindsets. And I guess that's kind of ties those first three in together as well. But there's some fantastic examples that you find out there, and I think this is probably true for a lot of athletes, Rob, a lot of elite athletes that you hear, not just in football but in rugby as well, and lots of other sports. But there's some great examples you hear in football where Cristiano Ronaldo get back from an away trip at 2 a.m. in the morning and go in an ice bath because that's what he felt like he needed to do. Now, whether or not that's physiologically the best thing for him to do at 3 a.m, I don't know, but that's his elite mindset. That's what he needed to do. You hear things of people like Harry Kane and what they do, but even at our club, things like Callum McGregor, Scott Bryan, what they do repeatedly, day in, day out, week in, week out, for years and years to build a career that they have. That's something that we need to try and instill into our players. And we're effectively going to fail at that last bit, I think, but it's having that understanding that, they're adolescent players. They're still going to go and have a McDonald's, or they're still going to say no to an ice bath or whatever it needs to be, but it's just trying to get them slowly to broaden their mindsets and understand that these are the important things. But so yeah, they're the four things that we always say to players, Rob, and that we sort of try and build things around. And then underneath that, as I said, it's like the analysis and the environment that we try and create effectively. So hopefully that answers a long answer to your question, mate, but hopefully that gives an indication of what we...
I would say in depth, not long. It was good. There was a lot there to dig in, but it's really interesting, just that theme of repeatability, like being able to have repeated high intensity efforts repeatedly throughout a season for repeated seasons, as well as all the things around, being a multi-directional athlete, having those habits. But it's no good having a habit for 1 day a week. Again, it's got to be repeatable. And I think that's a message that is applicable to all youth athletes. Is it's not about what you did 1 day 4 weeks ago. It's about being able to have that consistency to come back and do it again. So it's having that same breakfast again 3 or 4 times a week, having that same stretching routine, doing it. It's that consistency, but also not just going through the motions. It's like turning up, applying yourself, having, as you say, that Champions League mindset, and doing that consistently builds those bricks over time that creates a Champions League player. It's not done overnight, and it's not done once. No,
and it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I'm sure that we were all, when we were at school, or if you were in an elite environment yourself, there's certain people that will, I don't know, maybe do their homework or adhere to things more than other people, and it's the same. It's exactly the same here. Some people find naturally adhering to things that we ask them to do, or creating habits they find quite easy. Other players naturally find it a bit more difficult. So it's about having that intent, isn't it? So it's not just going on the foam roller because I've asked you to go on a foam roller. It's understanding that this might help release some, myofascial release or whatever it needs to be. You can feel a little bit better, or just buying into recovery in general. But again, with that, we try and give players autonomy, Rob. So we try and give them a bit of understanding. So, for example, we periodize what we eat based on the week. So if we're doing a heavy intensive session, out in the pitch, lots of multi-directional change of direction and twist and turn and jump in. We then, mirror that in the gym with doing our main strength session of the week. So lots of protein breakdown that day. We'll make sure that at lunchtime we're going to have, maybe red meats. That's the day that we can have a lot more protein in our diet, more calories in general. It's that understanding. So we, last season, pre-COVID, we put in effectively a 6-week diet schedule, if you want to call it that, nutrition schedule, where each Monday then would look differently, each Tuesday would look differently, but have the same theme. So if it was more of a red meat day, it might be a lasagna one day, it might be steak the following week, whatever it needs to be. Anyway, after that sort of initial block, we just went through what do you like, what do you not like. We've got an idea because we took a bit of a tally, so we know sort of what was really good and what wasn't. And we let them come up with their own dishes and their own ideas. And then all of a sudden, the adherence to the soups that we have. So we must have soup before your main. It's just a little thing that we do, but it's a way of getting in more vitamins and minerals. But we thought they'd really like the chicken noodle soup. Hated it. They just loved lentil soup. Fine. If you want lentil soup every day, have lentil soup every day. It's not a problem. So just little things like that. Same with the recovery. Some players love ice baths. Some players hate them. If you don't want to get in one and you want to do something else, not a problem. We'll have a recovery builder. I'm sure people do it. It's like a points builder thing, and certain activities are worth different points, different scores. And you've got, as long as you get over the threshold, we're pretty happy. So that's fine. And what works for you doesn't work for me. And if you want to devise your own. That's great. And there is a line, I think, with adolescent players that you can do that with. Obviously, you can't all of a sudden start asking them to do their power programming or strength programming of mesocycles or what they'd like to do, but recovery, nutrition, maybe upper body gym, maybe core work, whatever we can get in, we do really. But that's, autonomy is a big thing here, and it's probably something I maybe didn't value as highly as what I should have earlier in my career, but I've really, really sort of seen the benefits of putting as much autonomy in as I can. And it's really surprising, what a 16-year-old actually wants, and you forget what you wanted maybe as a 16-year-old. You think you knew everything, didn't you, really? So it's it's something that's been really, really powerful.
It's a really important part of the journey as well, I think. And that's why this middle bit of development is a really interesting phase to work in, because you're going from someone who, 5, 6, 7 years old, knows, barely knows where their nose is, to starts to experience what training is and what recovery is and what nutrition is. And they're starting to form those opinions or experiences of what I like or what I didn't like or what worked and what didn't work. And it's kind of about giving people enough rope to go and say, oh, I like this and that, and I don't want to do that, but also equally not enough to just go off on a tangent and do something completely counterproductive. And I think that's the balance that is probably the trickiest in this period, isn't it?
100%. And that's why, the majority of this is getting, or autonomy is going to happen when they come in full time, because that's when you can really have, it's like guided discovery. It's like, just color in whatever color you want, but stay within the lines. You know what I mean? It's that kind of approach where it's, like you said, younger ages, it's a bit more difficult, but those younger ages will spend time on, it is education, isn't it? Effectively, of, why is psychology important? Why is, understanding why confidence is important for you? Why should you know what protein and carbohydrates are, or whatever it needs to be? And we'll spend a long time there, and with parents, other key stakeholders, coaches and stuff, throughout the whole pathway, to have a bit of an identifiable thread, I guess, going all the way through. So when it comes to an end, when they have more scope to do that, we can do that. And it is a real critical age group, that I think that sort of 16 to maybe 23. So in football, that's your under 18s and under 23s, obviously, but it's a massive dropout, huge dropout of players. And I think a lot of talented players get to that point, and it's not always the most talented that end up making the first team debut or having a career. So there's got to be something in there. It's the missing piece of the puzzle. And I think it's, this development and this development culture is really, really key.
I think you're right in saying it's something that probably early career coaches don't really, maybe respect is the wrong word, but don't pay enough credence to, because you come out of uni and you think, I've learned everything. I know about periodization, I know about this or that, the other. If I write the perfect program, this athlete will get better. But there's that human psychological element. And I don't know, I'm assuming you've done the exercise course from what we've kind of said already, but I thought they did a really good job around some of that, those coaching skills bit of going, do you know what, actually, creating that autonomy from a player just around choice, just giving them a choice of, do you want to use a dumbbell or a kettlebell? You know, just that choice has given you an option to say, this is my part of the program, I put that in. And I think you kind of set yourself up to fail when coaches, you know, we kind of back ourselves into a corner and say, no, you have to do this. It's like, really, did it really matter whether they decided to do a power clean or a hand clean? You got what you wanted, but, you know, was that little fight or that little, you know, kind of interruption to the relationship worth it? You know, there's some battles that are worth putting your foot down. There's some going, it really doesn't matter whether you want to do a dumbbell bench or an incline dumbbell bench. You know, the outcome for me is pretty similar, but that player feels like they've been able to put their little signature on the program.
I couldn't agree more, Rob. No, 100%. And I think 95% or maybe even 90% effort and 100% effort from the outside, looking at you, looking at someone, looking at a player, probably to me looks very, very similar, if not the same. But we all know that there's a massive difference if you're only, you know, if you cut yourself short effectively. So if you can give them a choice, and a lot of the autonomy research suggests that don't make it open-ended, give them, it might only be a choice of 2, choice of 3. So like you said, if it's like, right, you've got a barbell, kettlebell, or a dumbbell, your choice. It's the same weight, you know, effectively. So a slight difference maybe in synergist activity or whatever it needs to be. But yeah, fine. If you pick whatever you want to pick, and if they can really adhere to that, great. I'm a big Mike Boyle fan, and always have been. So rear foot elevated split squats is like my staple, and I guess always has been in my exercises. But some people just absolutely hate doing them. Fine, no problem. We actually have had a lot of success on sort of K boxes and flywheel training. Players seem to really, really enjoy it. Fine, no problem. You can get a great stimulus off that. If you want to go and do 3/8s, 4/6s, whatever your program is, and you know, grip and rip as hard as you can, that's putting you down, you're getting loads of eccentric demand, perfect, not a problem. Go and do that. So no, 100%, mate. It's autonomy is so vital, I think, and yeah, Exos do a good job of that for sure.
Yeah, it is. I think you're right in saying it is a missing part, because I think people do get caught up in, you know, the 1% of this, you know, this exercise is a bit more power output than this exercise. And, you know, I've got this really scientific rationale for why I've picked that. But if the player doesn't want to do it and half-asses it, well, you're not getting the power output you think you are anyway. You know, you're better off going with the one they chose, but they're actually going to put the effort in.
And this is where I guess the whole philosophy and strategy kind of like, it was a bit of an epiphany for me, to be honest. It was like, what is the best thing for the player? Well, if they're going to enjoy it more, if they're going to adhere to it more, if they're going to help create a better environment, just not just for them, but collectively with a group, and, you know, they're adding to it instead of, you know, being a sponge and taking away from it because they're doing something they prefer, you know, we'll then pick a better strategy and use that philosophy of what's the best, you know, thing to do for that player. And I think that's, as I said, I just think it answers so many questions. It's brilliant. It's been a trusty addition to my program for sure.
I think that actually, you know, is really congruent with what you said earlier around, you know, does this come back to, is this in the player's best interests? Like, in order to have a very autonomy centric culture, you have to put your ego as a coach to the side and say, this isn't my program, this isn't my exercise selection, this is our journey together, we're trying to get you there together. You know, so my ego takes a back seat, and, you know, some coaches do that better than others, and, you know, to kind of relinquish a little bit of the authority or a little bit of that you know, autocratic kind of coaching method requires a bit of maybe experience or confidence or even humility. And I think that's maybe what some coaches struggle with.
I read a book recently, actually, Robert. It was Anthony Turner's and Paul Comfort's textbook they've got. I think it's called Advanced Strength and Conditioning. And then there's an introductory chapter, and I think it's by Perry Stewart. I don't know Perry. I think he's over at Arsenal. And he wrote about coaches and what it takes to be a strength and conditioning coach and what you need. And he sort of broke down knowledge into 3 areas. This wasn't his breakdown. He's kind of used it, he referenced it from elsewhere, but it was an idea of professional knowledge, interpersonal knowledge, and intrapersonal knowledge. So it's these kind of like 3 knowledge facets, if you like. Professional knowledge being your, you know, player, sport, needs analysis. That's your IQ, effectively. And then sort of the other 2 is your knowing yourself, being able to reflect, relationships with others. That's kind of more your EQ or your emotional sort of intelligence side. And that's the biggest side, I think, that develops later on as you go through your career. And I've definitely been guilty of it for sure. And it's very much like, I've learned about, I don't know, Verkhoshansky's shock method of players. Right, we've got to do this now, guys. This is the best thing since sliced bread. And it's kind of, you know, you've just got to realize, well, it's there's so many other factors at play, and I was definitely guilty of not really truly understanding the human side. I was more of an X's and O's and numbers, and we do this, and we'll come out with that. But I guess that might just been the education process that I went through, to be honest, at the time, maybe. And I think things have definitely got a lot better since then. And also just resources, in the 2000s, we didn't really have Twitter where people shared all their info, or there wasn't podcasts, like you said, like this one, or other places to get information. It was very much sort of, uni was practically the only place to get it, or go and buy £100 textbook. So I think it's something that people are developing more towards, and I think it's probably just a sign a little bit of our industry just going through a nice little change, I guess, and an evolution, I suppose.
Now, you've mentioned some really stellar resources already in this podcast. Dan Pink's work on Drive, and Dan Coyle, Culture Code. It takes me nicely to, you've obviously been reading up around this area. Are there any resources around this autonomy stuff that you would kind of signpost people towards if they were really interested in digging in deeper?
I think, we do a lot of reading anyway, I think, don't we? And scientific-based reading, which is great. But in terms of outside of that, they used to be called self-help books. I think they've changed the terminology on that now, because people aren't. I don't think we're a big fan of that title, but that was what it used to be called in Waterstones anyway. But I just lived in that section, I think, and I really enjoyed reading around. So anything, and sometimes you're reading things and you don't really think it's really going to make an impact maybe on you at work, but it's, I guess, just the development of your mindset and broadening what you think. And anything for me by Malcolm Gladwell's a really benefit. Michael Lewis is another fantastic author, which you can just help to open your mind to and stuff. But I think the main ones for me, as you said, Daniel Core has been brilliant with the talent code, the culture code, and Daniel Pink's work as well. He's also got a book called When. Simon Sinek's probably, I know this is all a bit cliched perhaps, but that had a big influence on me, sort of, Start With Why. It was just a great book to read, and it's again changed, but builds again into this whole idea of purpose with sort of Daniel Pink side of stuff as well. So it's funny how a lot of these books overlap with a lot of things, but there were some great ones for me. But the culture code, in terms of things like sharing your vulnerability, psychological safety, they're just fundamental things, just general empathy for people, I think. And they're just I'd recommend anything in and around that for any practitioners, as well as we sort of mentioned, the professional side of knowledge. I think just balance those two things. Hopefully, with your sort of CPD wise, you're continually developing your professional knowledge, whatever it needs to be, whether it's a journal club or whether it's higher education. But I certainly recommend people go down maybe the PhD route, or I'm personally doing a professional doctorate, but I think they're incredibly useful things to do. And I think that's the way in which our industry is going to be going, to be brutally honest with you. We need the research skills to be able to answer the question on, are we effectively doing our jobs? How can we evaluate our efficacies? How can we actually say that this intervention was a success or not? And if it wasn't, I don't think that's a massive issue, because, it's the whole fail and fail again. It's, how many Dyson Hoovers prototypes were there before, the final product came out, whatever it was, 130 odd or whatever. I know it's all a little bit cliche to some regards, but it's so true. For me, if you're going down that route, great, keep it going, but then otherwise expand your mind, whether that's legacy, whether that's all the other great books. There's some really good resources out there, and I'd definitely just head to that sort of self-help section for sure.
Yeah, I think it's funny how you kind of maybe reading habits or topics kind of alter over time. Like I remember coming out of uni, and I think I had reading fatigue, having to read so many different journals for a master's and all that kind of stuff. And I started only maybe a year or two after to dig back into pretty much all those books you've just listed, and realizing actually there's so much that, as you say, I've learned that professional knowledge, but that interpersonal knowledge I'm realizing is missing. And I can write the best program in the world, but if that athlete hates me, within him, he can't help it that he's got a human instinct that he doesn't want to do what I've told him to do, because our personal relationship isn't functioning well. So, someone could look at my program and say, yeah, that's a fantastic program, that will achieve the outcome. But our interpersonal relationship has deteriorated so much that he doesn't want to do it because he hates me, not because it's beneficial for him, but because, things just aren't going well interpersonally. And that's something that's a little bit maybe out of the scope for most kind of strength conditioning coaches when you're just reading about periodization or bands and chains or potentiation. We don't think about that human aspect of things. And I think you've really done a good job of explaining that on a day-to-day basis and how to cultivate that. So I think that's there's some really meaty information there for people to get stuck into.
It's certainly changed my outlook, I think, and the older I've got. It's something I've definitely looked into, but it's even things like self-reflection. It's not really something I actually valued, and I don't do it enough. And when I do, I really do get a benefit from it. But the professional doctorate that I do, there is a reflection chapter in it. You have to reflect regularly. The base is SE. I'm a supervisor and reviewer for that. You have to self-reflect on that. So it's, if you don't have a particularly good relationship with people, you can sort of quickly find out why. So it's almost that evaluation of yourself, not evaluation of your program, isn't it? So, okay, that relationship's not going very well. Why isn't it very good? How can I help that potentially? And yeah, no, like exactly like you said, there is a bit of a likability factor. So it's the whole how to win friends and influence people as well. Dale Carnegie's book, isn't it? That again had a massive impact on me, but completely changed my idea of how I can deal with other professionals in other areas. And I tell you what, actually, another really good resource is, have you come across Insights, Rob? There's like a behavioral, I don't want to call it a psychological profile, it's more behavioral profile. So you get colored based. So I think it's red, yellow, blue, and green.
Oh, yeah. I think I have heard of that.
Yeah. So red's like your typical alpha male. Blue's like, your analytical person. They must know all the information. Yellow, so you're just general, really happy. It's, it's -5 outside here in Scotland and they're still buzzing with life. And, greens is sort of maybe just somewhere in between a lot of these. But even that really helps. I've read a book on that. I can't remember what it's called, to be honest. But even understanding things like that, how to deal with people and, what are you? So some of that self-awareness as well of you and that emotional intelligence to understand, well, how do I come across the people? How does that work? How does my relationship maybe need to change if I'm managing with a colleague as opposed to managing up the chain or down the chain or whatever it needs to be? But these are the things I think that maybe sports science courses and sports science practitioners maybe as an early on in their careers probably don't give quite enough emphasis towards. However, saying that, there is a lot to know, isn't there? There's a lot to know in terms of sports science and all the different domains of physiology, biochemistry and nutrition and whatever it needs to be. So I completely understand that. But no, I think this is where things like mentors really help, isn't it? And it's something where I've definitely been aided by other people, sort of, been in the industry longer than myself. So.
Fantastic. So, if people were keen to kind of, I guess, keep tabs on what you're up to, what you're doing work-wise, where can they find you on, various places around the internet?
Yeah, so Twitter's the main one. So I had to relinquish Ollie Morgan. It was taken up by a rugby player. So it's Oliver John M is my handle, but if you Googled Ollie Morgan Celtic, it would soon come up. That's probably your best bet. Hopefully we'll be submitting for some publication soon on some of our prof work. So it's looking to change the direction demands of elite youth football. So hopefully that will touch wood and go through the publication phase and we can start disseminating some information through Twitter and stuff. As we will, we've got 3 embedded PhD students here at Celtic. So again, that's probably one of the main sources that we'll start to sort of send information out as well as the official channels. But yeah, that's the main one. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. I don't tend to use that too much, to be really honest with you. But if you wanted to message me on either one, I'll always do my best to get back to you. And whether it's a phone call or just a chat, if you've got questions, by all means, just reach out. It's not an issue.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. That's been a really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I know other people will take loads away from it too. So thanks for your time today.
No, thank you, Rob. No, I really enjoyed it too. Thanks very much.